Hey folks, this is Matthew Zachary, and before we get to the show, I wanted to tell you about another show from Offscript Media called The Cancer Mavericks. It's an 8-part deep dive narrative into the very story of cancer survivorship and the movement that started in the United States 50 years ago. This is not a podcast about the disease of cancer. It's a podcast about the people who made it better for all of us. Please search for The Cancer Mavericks wherever you listen to your podcasts and follow so you don't miss an episode. Thank you.
Welcome to the FUMS Now podcast show, where you'll gain information, inspiration, and motivation for living your best life with multiple sclerosis. Find us online at FUMSnow.com. I'm your host, Kathy Reagan Young. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the FUMS podcast. I appreciate you hanging out with me again. Today, I'm talking with a scientist who's done research on psychedelic drugs and their effect on autoimmune diseases. Super interesting stuff. But before I introduce you to her, I want to tell you that I'll soon be launching a brand new podcast called Patients Getting Paid for people with chronic illness who want to learn to find and create flexible remote work for themselves. Additionally, I'll be launching the Patients Getting Paid membership with trainings on a ton of things like how to become a patient advocate or influencer, how to build your own website, how to kill it on social media, how much you can make in addition to your disability payment and still get your disability payment, how to choose a legal entity for your chronicpreneur business, and oh, so much more. Get on the waiting list and be the first to know when I launch it. Go to patientsgettingpaid.com/list to sign up and start receiving the weekly newsletter as well. Okay, let's get to it. Today's guest is Caitlin Thompson. During her healing process from Lyme disease, chronic fatigue, PTSD, pain, and a plethora of other autoimmune symptoms, neurobiologist Caitlin Thompson became fascinated with the potential of using psychedelic substances to treat and relieve autoimmune and chronic health conditions. Caitlin is an independent scientific researcher studying the potential of psychedelic compounds as a novel approach to autoimmune conditions, in addition to conducting some of the first human Cambo studies. She's also an active Cambo practitioner and educator. I didn't know what that was either. Hold on, she'll tell us. Her greatest passion is sharing her healing journey and using it to inspire and empower others with the knowledge that everyone has the innate ability to heal themselves. Really interesting concept. Welcome, Caitlin.
Hi, thank you for having me. Such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, so glad you could make it all the way from Bali, Indonesia. Very exciting. Very exotic.
Yep.
I found you because I went hunting for any research on psychedelics and MS. I've just never seen anything about it, but with all the recent research I was reading about psychedelics and depression, I was curious if there was anything, specific to MS. And I came across a study that you co-authored titled Psychedelics as a Novel Approach to Treating Autoimmune Conditions. And I reached out, and now you're here. And by the way, I will put a link in the show notes to that study. It's super interesting. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we get into it, will you please talk a bit about your educational background and your issues and your diagnosis with autoimmune disease?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell a little story that will kind of paint the picture of how intimately linked my healing journey from my chronic illness was with psychedelics. So I was in my undergraduate studying neurobiology, and when I became a young adult, like pretty much, straight away into college, I started with a lot of psychedelic exploration, mostly just out of curiosity. I was going to raves, I was going to Burning Man, and then I became really quite passionate about the psychedelic journey, and went and drank ayahuasca by the time I was 21 in Peru. But then towards the probably the last year of my undergraduate degree, my classes were quite difficult. So I said, I'm just going to take a step back from partying and taking drugs and try to, finish my degree in this last home stretch. And
I think a number of us had to have that conversation with ourselves in college. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Right.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's like you can get away with a certain amount, when the classes are like a general ed or whatever. But
Right.
when they got into like organic chemistry and biochemistry and calculus, yeah. I just needed to be a little bit more clear-headed. So anyways, I took a little bit of a break from taking psychedelics, and this really interesting phenomena occurred. I found that around the 7th to 8th week mark after my last psychedelic experience, I would start to become increasingly anxious and kind of chemically unravel. I started to feel irritable and depressed, and had more pain and more fatigue, and just felt overall like crappier. And this happened like clockwork multiple times before I was finally able to like see this pattern. And all of this kind of brought me to an understanding and an awareness that I had been managing this chronic illness, specifically manifesting in my neurology as depression, anxiety, brain fog, chronic fatigue, things like that. With psychedelic drugs, I had been mitigating it pretty well, actually, enough that I didn't even fully appreciate that I actually was substantially disadvantaged. And it wasn't until I had the contrast of feeling what it wasn't like to be sort of staving off these symptoms. And this really was the breakthrough that led me down my entire healing journey. And it led me to my fascination with the microbiome, with psychedelic pharmacology, with nutraceuticals. And I decided I wanted to learn as much about why this was happening as possible. And this all ended up leading to me discovering just how sick I had actually been my entire life without realizing it. I always thought that I was just pathetic. I was always told I was normal. I would tell the doctor like, hey, I feel like sleeping 14 hours a day is not really normal. And they'd be like, oh, you're growing, or, oh, you're just stressed, or, well, you've heard all the same excuses, I'm sure. There was never
Yes.
really any reason. Well, you look fine, you're pretty, or whatever. So I never really thought there was anything wrong with me, but I deeply felt that like the lack of resilience that I had just wasn't a sign of a vital young 20-something-year-old. So that was kind of the beginning of my health journey. And of course, through this, I came to find that I had, a history of chronic infections like Lyme disease and Epstein-Barr, and gut dysbiosis with things like Klebsiella pneumoniae and Enterobacter. And then I started digging deeper into the emotional components of why my nervous system was stuck in this chronic sympathetic patterning, and why I had malabsorption of nutrients, and what foods were actually contributing to these autoimmune mechanisms. And then the whole thing just kept unraveling, and I'm still on the ride.
That's so interesting. And was this purely done on your own, or were you working with any doctors or any practitioners or anyone else, or just you started noticing trends and started digging deeper?
I largely was figuring this out on my own just by being able to read scientific literature, though I did have a number of mentors and supportive healers like naturopathic doctors or nurses or somatic therapists. And so I definitely had support along the way, but I did not go in through any sort of conventional route like most people do when they're not feeling well, where they put all this sort of weight in their doctor's hands to figure it out. I really just took initiative, and I did, for the shits and giggles, kind of explore what conventional medicine could do for me. But as I suspected, there really wasn't much support or usefulness in the tools that they could offer. So I didn't end up really exploring much on that route.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. And good that you trusted yourself and that you had the education behind you to be able to, for instance, read and understand the medical literature, because that, is a stopping point for a lot of people. It's just so medically dense and overwhelming in terms with a lot of the terms and that sort of thing. So you really, it's like you were set up to kind of be this pioneer. So if you don't mind, let's get to that study that brought me to you. Can you detail that study a little bit? Like where did that come from? Was that just kind of a hypothesis or a I wonder, moment for you? And let's put together a study on this?
Yeah, so it was largely inspired by my own intuitive journey, where I realized that psychedelics seem to be really helping improve my autoimmune symptoms and progression of any disease, track. And this led me to starting to dig and search in the literature for evidence of this. And the paper that me and my partner Attila Sabo wrote, it's actually a literature review. So it's not a proper study. It wasn't like a placebo-controlled, clinical trial or anything. That would have been amazing. But it really is the first piece of literature even exploring the evidence that makes psychedelics a good case for studying further around autoimmune diseases. So I just started collecting all this information that theoretically posed a good case for why we should actually look at this connection between psychedelics and the immune system. And so that's largely what the paper was about, was just creating consolidated information that could perhaps inspire other scientists who have more capacity, more resources to do more formal studies.
Yeah, very cool. So was it truly a meta-analysis of everything, all of the things that the resources that you were able to find in the literature?
Yeah, basically. And to be honest, there isn't a lot of evidence. It was like we really had to piece together things and help the reader connect the dots, because it was things that weren't entirely obvious how they were related to each other or autoimmunity. For example, talking about how psychedelics help resolve trauma and dysfunctional hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis stress responses, people might not understand the connection between that and their autoimmune disease. But it turns out that autoimmunity and other chronic illnesses tend to have a very high scientifically studied correlation between childhood trauma.
So interesting. I mean, we've heard this for years, like mind, body, spirit, right? It's all connected. And I have a dear friend who is a doctor, and I can't count the number of times that she said to me when I've talked to her about different situations that I've experienced myself, and she'll say, Kathy, it's all connected. Like, I think we get the notion that it's very, I don't know, specific and somehow separate from my estimation, because we've gotten away from the notion of wholeness because we have specialists for everything. So, like even a general practitioner, it's really hard to find someone like that. I mean, I think that's maybe, a naturopath these days maybe kind of takes the place of what used to be the general practitioner a bit. And I know I'm guilty of this. As soon as, I identify something, an issue going on, I think like, who's the specialist I should go to? So I have really compartmentalized all my different parts when the truth is it's all one thing. And if maybe we treated it like that, we could have, I don't know, better outcomes, rather than compartmentalizing each situation, right? Like even, the more that I read about the gut, and I know you talk a lot about this too, and the microbiome, what an impact that has on everything. I have really, and let me tell you, my background, my degree is in English, so who knows, but I read a lot about this stuff, but it certainly seems to me that seems to be correlative, causative, I don't know, but correlative certainly in a lot of diseases, perhaps all diseases. There at least a kernel of it, right? So paying attention to nutrition and our microbiome and what our gut's telling us, seems like that could be very impactful, not just for, MS or these major diseases that we identify, but kind of everything, even mental health, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the deeper we look at the microbiome, the more we realize we don't understand it at all. It's just
Right.
a mystery.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? That seems like a whole nother, I don't know, cosmo that we haven't studied enough yet. But it does seem like there's more resources going toward that these days.
What's up, people? Matthew Zachary here. Let me talk to you about Unraveled, a brand new podcast from the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute that gives us hope about the progress of cancer research. And yes, believe it or not, there's actually been a ton of progress. I mean, who doesn't know someone affected by cancer or someone who's donated to cancer research? While that philanthropy is desperately needed, most people who give don't understand what's actually happening in the trenches of cancer research and the impact that has on all of us. It's time to go beyond the headlines with Unraveled. Listen to the stories of doctors, researchers, patients. Learn about the breakthrough science like using genetically engineered T cells to turn a patient's immune system into a cancer-fighting machine. Yes, that really happens. It's not science fiction. These are stories of the people who continue to fight for better research, better cures, and better care for patients, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Follow Unraveled from the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Are you tired of wasting time making trips to the grocery store, waiting in checkout lines, and overpaying for groceries every week? We thought so. Luckily, there's a better way. Misfits Market takes the hassle out of grocery shopping by delivering fresh, organic produce and sustainable groceries straight to your home at prices up to 40% less than traditional grocery stores. You'll get access to exclusive weekly savings on peak season organic produce, high-quality meats and seafood, and sustainably sourced pantry staples like snacks, pasta, and grains, plus keto-friendly and gluten-free foods. Do your weekly shopping in just minutes with Misfits Market, all with no service fees, membership fees, or commitments. Become a free member today and get $15 off your first order through September 30th. Just go to www.misfitsmarket.com and use code GROCERY15. That's promo code GROCERY15 for $15 off your first order. Misfits Market is not available in all 50 states. For more info, visit misfitsmarket.com.
So back to that study again, or I should just call it a paper, I guess. Are there more studies being done or conducted on autoimmune and psychedelics in general, or MS in particular, to your knowledge?
Unfortunately, I don't think there is. I mean, unless it's been a fairly recent development that some smaller lab that I haven't heard much from is doing.
Yeah.
The person that I partnered with, Dr. Sabo, he is pretty much the only one that I'm aware of that's even done any investigation on the effects of psychedelic on immunology. So I already partnered with the person that I think would probably know the most about it out of anyone in the world. So yeah, I think it's right around the corner, but currently I don't know of anything going on.
Yeah, that's so strange. And resources are limited, certainly. And I think a lot of people find this like a taboo, woo-woo, scary subject, And so until we kind of get over that and get to doing some serious research on it, I don't know that we'll make many strides, unfortunately. So anybody out there that's listening, we want to help you make this happen because this is very promising, I think. So, okay. Thank you for all that information about that stuff and about your background. And I did actually reach out to you specifically about that paper because, like I said, I went searching. I was just interested. Has anything been done about this? And then you said to me, once you accepted, and thank you for that, you told me that you are a Cambo or combo. We had this conversation off air, tomato, tomato, practitioner. And you'd be happy to talk about that. And I thought, that's great. And then I thought, what in the hell is that? And I did very, very limited research, as I told you, because I like to just be responsive and, be like my listeners and think of what they would ask. So why don't you give me a little background on that? This is how much I know, because I did go to your site and a few other papers, but it has to do with an Amazonian frog, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some excretion and the introduction of that excretion into, I would call it sort of a portal, whether it's like a burn maybe on a person's body, right? And then therein happens kind of the magic. Why don't you explain it better than I just did?
That was actually pretty good. I feel like you got all the core pieces.
Good.
So yeah, the reason I made a point to mention the Cambo is because it is one of my main crafts. And while psychedelics show tremendous promise for helping autoimmune diseases like MS, I do have actual personal experience working on people with MS as a Cambo practitioner. And overall, I think it holds as much potential, if not more, for helping resolve these autoimmune mechanisms in people. So just wanted to preset that. But so Cambo is an Amazonian medicinal ritual in which the skin secretion of a specific type of tree frog called Phylomedusa bicolor, that's the species name, is applied to very superficial burns made on the skin, usually on the upper arm. But if you can get creative and put it other places like chakras and such. But once it is applied to the burns, it induces a purgative experience for about 20 to 30 minutes. It's non-hallucinogenic. So this is not an illegal or scheduled substance in all countries currently. That could, of course, change in the future. And it's quite unpleasant. I mean, it's very intense. Your heart rate goes up. You get hot. You get nausea and intestinal cramping. You can get facial swelling. You can sweat. It's not the most pleasant thing to go through, but it's short. And the secretion is full of hundreds of absolutely amazing peptide molecules. So while there's so much that could still be explored, there's at least a good foundation of some science on some of these peptide families that are in this secretion from the Cambo frog. And it's like the future of antibiotics, anti-malarials, anti-HIV drugs, anti-cancerous drugs, anti-hypertensive drugs. Like it's just a cocktail of medicine. It's absolutely fascinating, especially as a scientist. I find it to be really amazing just how potent they seem to be. And they seem to be specifically benign to animal cells, but then incredibly targeted and toxic to viruses, bacteria, filamentous fungi, protozoa like malaria, things like that. So I've just seen really amazing things from working with 1,000+ people with this medicine, including people with pretty severe MS who can barely walk into my house, and they're able to take the medicine safely, of course in a very cautious way because of their condition, and then they come back the next day like bright-eyed. They can walk without their cane. It's unlike any other intervention that I've ever witnessed or worked with personally.
Holy cow, that's saying a lot. So how long does the unpleasantness last? You said it's pretty short-lived. Did you say 20 minutes or so?
Yeah, 20 to 30 minutes is pretty average. Yeah.
Okay. Ugh. Okay. Well,
totally worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're talking about being able to walk without a cane, then, and how long does this last? Is this something you have to repeat, or is it a one and done? What's been your experience?
Well, that's a great question. So definitely from my personal experience and my experience as a practitioner, when I'm working with patients with chronic illnesses or autoimmune conditions, I guess kind of the same thing, I tend to see that they get the best results when they do a series of 3 within a fairly close proximity of time, probably within about a month or 2. And then generally some follow-up maintenance is what works best. But it really kind of comes down to what people's individual goals are and sort of what their standard of their health is. I can say for my recovery process, Cambo was one of the most powerful interventions that I used in my recovery from being chronically ill. And the pattern that I sort of went on with it is, after I did my initial series of 3, I was on about a once a month program. And then as I started to get healthier, it would I would move the goalpost a bit, and it was like once every 6 weeks, and then once every 8 weeks, and then kind of once quarterly. And then these days, I honestly hardly ever take a full purgative dose of Cambo. And I really just kind of spot treatment with microdoses of it, which are non-purgative doses that are quite gentle and easy and even pleasant, if I dare say so. And so, yeah, I do think that prolonged sort of use of it, if needed, can be useful. But I also want to add that there are no long-term studies about this substance. Like, we don't know if this is good to use long-term. I'm only speaking from my own personal experience and that of other people that I know who have used it consistently.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That's really important to note. And I saw that on your site as of December 2020. It said no human studies on Cambo as a procedure at the time of writing this article. I assume that's still true? Yeah. Okay. It also says on your site, because Cambo has only been recently discovered by Western societies, no one knows the long-term effects of taking Cambo regularly. Here's the question I had about that statement. There's no long-term or even anecdotal evidence in other societies that have utilized this practice. I'm assuming, for no good reason other than I'm assuming, that this has been utilized in other, societies for a long time. Is that not correct?
Yeah. So, a number of indigenous tribes in the Amazon basin in, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, they have used Cambo for generations and generations. It's unclear exactly how long. It's somewhat debatable whether it's been hundreds of years or thousands of years. No one really knows. Yeah. And there doesn't seem to be any evidence of any complications around long-term use of it. Some tribes do have an idea such as that they want to limit their number of Cambo applications to 12 or 13 times per year or less. But this is not necessarily agreed upon amongst all the tribes. Like, they all have their own unique ways that they work with the Cambo, as far as frequency and dosage and how they feel about it. So the truth is, just nobody really knows. But so far, there's no evidence to support that there are long-term damaging effects.
Okay. So these indigenous people, are they using this medicinally, ceremoniously, both? What are they using this for?
So they do use it medicinally and they do use it ritualistically, but I'm going to differentiate that from ceremonially. And I'll explain that in a second. Please. So most of the tribes have actually used this traditionally as a hunting aid. So before they would go on these multiple day long hunts to find a capybara or whatever their next item is for the tribe to eat, they would do the Cambo, and it basically acts as like an adaptogen where it's increasing stamina, endurance, it's reducing their appetite and the need for water, and improving visual acuity, and allegedly covering their human scent. I don't know.
Okay.
But it's also used as a warrior medicine. So if they were about to go into some sort of warfare situation, the men would take it to, like, boost their yang energy, their vigor.
Right.
And then as far as medicinally, it is used for malaria, for snake bites, and for something called panema. So panema is this dark cloud of like funky energy or like bad luck. I would kind of equate it to being similar as like inflammation or depression in somebody.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they use it to clear panema, along with a couple other medicines like rape, which is a tobacco snuff, and sananga, which are these botanical eye drops used in conjunction. And it's supposed to just, clear away any weird fog. And as far as the ceremonial,
rid of the mojo.
Exactly. Yeah. So now, as far as the ceremonial aspect of it, from my understanding, is that there's actually not really a traditional ceremonial process around this substance, which is something that Westerners have kind of romanticized. Like they talk about like, oh, the Kambo shaman, and that's just not really a thing. You don't have to be a shaman to administer Kambo amongst the tribes. Women do it, children do it. Like, you don't have to be anyone special to use that medicine or put it on somebody else. There's not traditional songs, really. There's not like a spiritual practice around it. I think, a lot of people are very fascinated with the idea of ayahuasca, which is this psychedelic Amazonian brew. And there is, some concurrent use of these medicines in conjunction near each other or by the same tribes. But the truth is they have completely different traditions and they're completely different, processes to go through. So the ceremonial aspect that a lot of practitioners have adopted in the modern world is largely made up by Westerners, which I'm actually okay with. I think it actually amplifies the healing potential of the experience to be in a ceremonial context, but it's not traditional. And, that's okay. I don't think traditional is always better.
Right. And tradition has to start somewhere, right?
Exactly.
Something else you mentioned on your site that I really want to get in front of everyone. And again, we have show notes, so you can find all the show notes for all of the podcasts at fumsnow.com/podcasts. But something else you mentioned was many contraindications and drug interactions are largely unknown at this time, obviously, because there's just no studies been done on this. So I just want to caution everybody. I'm I always say FUMS is here to provide information, inspiration, and motivation. And this is definitely informational and anecdotal. And I'm grateful to you for coming and sharing your experience and obvious education and everything. But I do want to mention to everybody that we don't know a lot about it. So you need to keep that in mind and always, pay attention to things like that. There are so many questions to be answered, scientifically speaking, certainly. So I'll certainly be watching this closely because this is really super interesting stuff. And I just feel like here in Western medicine has recently gotten to a point where they're more open to researching things other than what they can understand. I mean, that sounds dumb because what else would you research? But I'm saying things outside of the realm or those things that have typically kind of been, what would be the word? Kind of a no-no, basically. So, psychedelics in particular have been this very fringe kind of, considered very hippie-ish, often ritualistic thing to do. And that kind of flies in the face of a lot of Western medicine and research and that sort of thing. And I'm just happy to see that we are, I think, reaching a point where the two can kind of come together. And Western medicine and research can kind of take it to their own level. And we can learn so much from both sides of things and feel better, be better for it, having researched it and really understand it. And I hope that my fondest hope is that they can get rid of the purgative aspect of it. And I just want to be really clear. By purgative, you mean puking, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I just want to be clear on that one. No thanks. I do everything to avoid that. But again, do the ends justify the means? Potentially. Such an interesting topic.
Yeah. And a lot of people also feel that the purgative process is fundamental for the spiritual releasing of, baggage and emotional pain. So, it's hard to say maybe that is actually an important element of why it's a healing process,
Right. Yeah. It is so interesting. And that just goes back again to the wholeness of oneself, and like I said, I've been watching with great interest in the studies that are coming out about the psychedelics and depression. Who'd have thunk that, right? And so, and so many people with MS have depression. And then now there's all these studies about the microbiome and all the digestive issues that people with MS have. So it's really interesting. It feels like such the puzzle, and every little piece that exists, we don't have currently. So I hope that Western medicine and researchers will take that into consideration and take every piece that's being offered and study it, because that may be the piece that we're missing that could make such a big difference. And I appreciate that you bringing this to our attention for sure.
Yeah, my pleasure. My aim is really to help bridge the gap between science and spirituality, because I don't think there's any reason we can't explore these elements of spirituality and ritual and alternative health through the empirical method of science. Because at the end of the day, science is just a method for investigating phenomena. Right.
Yeah. Well said. Well, Caitlin, thanks so much for coming here and sharing all of this interesting information. I really appreciate it. It's really, really interesting stuff. If people want to get in touch with you or learn more about your paper, or maybe even find a Kambo practitioner, where would they go to get in touch with you? Where do they find you?
Yeah, so if you want to connect with me directly, probably the easiest way is to actually go on my Kambo site, medicinefrogkambo.com, and that's Kambo. I'm sure it'll be linked on the show notes.
It will.
And I'm not exactly sure when this will be released, but I'm almost finished building a Kambo directory site right now. Called cambofinder.com. And so hopefully by the time the listeners are hearing this, they should actually be able to search for practitioners in their area and get access to them and be able to screen them and have reviews and see what their certifications and qualifications and experience level is. So, but for now, you may just have to wait. And feel free to reach out if you have a question or you just want to share or connect. I really love when people send me an email. And I'd be happy to chat.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And thanks so much for, staying up. Well, it's not that late for you. It's 9 o'clock and you're young, but 9 p.m. in Bali. But thank you for joining me, and thank you for sharing all this super interesting information with us, and for everything that you're doing. And we'll keep an eye on you, because I think this won't be the last time, hopefully, that we'll chat. So thank you so much, Caitlin.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate your time.
Quick shout out to Steve Woodward at podcastingeditor.com for the fantastic work on this podcast, including editing, show notes, and ingenious ideas. If you'd like help with your podcast, whether you're just starting out or an old pro, visit podcastingeditor.com and tell Steve I sent you. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you listening to the FUMS podcast show. Be sure to subscribe to it so you won't miss an episode. You can do that right on the website at FUMSnow.com. While you're there, Sign up for the free email list so you'll be among the first to know of any new findings in MS research, new therapies and products, as well as any blog posts and podcast episodes I release. Want to chat with others in the FUMS community? Join us on Facebook at FUMS Now. Thanks again, and don't forget to talk to the stupid disease as it deserves. Tell it FUMS every day.